tell you things are bad? Everybody knows things are bad. It's a depression. Everybody's out of work or scared of losing their job. The dollar buys a nickel's worth. Banks are going bust. Shopkeepers keep a gun under the counter. Punks are running wild in the street. There's nobody anywhere who seems to know what to do, and there's no end to it. We know the air is unfit to breathe. Our food is unfit to eat. We sit watching our TVs while some local newscaster tells us that today we had 15 homicides and 63 violent crimes, as if that's the way it's supposed to be. We know things are bad, worse than bad. They're crazy. It's like everything everywhere is going crazy, so we don't go out anymore. We sit in the house, and slowly the world we're living in is getting smaller, and all we say is, please, at least leave us alone in our living rooms. Let me have my toaster and my TV and my steel-belted radios, and I won't say anything. Just leave us alone. Well, I'm not going to leave you alone. I want you to get mad.
Okay, peace. Welcome back, everybody. Episode 12, Wake Up Show. We're going to continue on. Today, I want to jump into, as mentioned previously, the work of Jonathan Haidt, The Anxious Generation. I want to play a clip of a fairly recent interview of his, touching on some of the topics, some of the main points. I will be doing along with other books related to this, I'll be doing a lecture series on the Patreon of Locals with this piece here. Really good work. I definitely agree with most of it. Again, as usual, it seems like there's more that can be done, and we understand that a lot of these individuals are part of industries, right? They themselves are captured by certain things like career and those who they're accountable to. So, of course, the full truth can't necessarily be provided in a lot of these academic works. So we try to dig into them and go a little deeper, if you will. So I appreciate you all for returning back to the Wake Up Show, and we're going to jump into it. So let's start it off. It's about 26 minutes. I'd like to get through the whole thing without having to speed it up, but still be able to chime in here and there and get into the clips and visuals I have for after we watch this, and still try to do it within a little over an hour. So let's go for it, man. Let's go for it. So here we are.
Destruction of human capital and potential in human history. Right now, I think we're seeing the greatest destruction of human capital and potential in human history outside of the two world wars, because this is happening on a vast scale. Young people have basically given up all their attention to a few companies.
Hello and welcome to the AMA Update video and podcast. Today we have a special AMA Update with Jonathan Haidt, best-selling
Fair use, please. Don't hit me. Fair use.
author and Thomas Cooley Professor of Ethical Leadership at the NYU Stern School of Business in New York. He's here today to discuss his newest book, The Anxious Generation: How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness.
Now, he focuses on the epidemic of mental illness, which is very true. It's this kind of cognitive rewiring. I don't necessarily adhere to the chemical-based model of the brain, but I do believe that it's useful. I don't think they understand what they're describing, but it does help understand at least the changes, right? I have a lot of issues with psychology, especially psychiatry, and a lot of the models they use. But it isn't to say we can't gain something from them as far as trying our best to understand that, look, something's happening, right? There's a change going on here, and the changes are negative. So there is that whole side that he tends to focus on. I focus more on its effect on culture, especially with the technological angle, where I borrow a lot of ideas from Baudrillard and some of these other philosophers regarding hyperreality and how not only are these technologies changing aspects of behavior in the brain, but it's also changing the way culture is developed. In the title, I put content creation as culture creation because that's what it is. Hence the importance of analyzing content creation, being aware of it, of its, let's say, influence, if you will, right? Influencers, and its ability to drastically change the way culture moves forward, which dictates the way human civilization operates in the world. So I tend to focus more on the cultural aspects of it and essentially the spiritual underpinnings of all of that. But what we're seeing is this confluence of tech, culture, and behavior that's changing the way the world is operating. So I just want to make that clear. We're definitely moving far beyond what Haidt describes in his work, but his work is still important to nail down and to confirm some of the ideas we've had in the past.
He'll also talk about the important role that physicians and the medical community can play in addressing and even reversing this epidemic. I'm Todd Unger, AMA's Chief Experience Officer in Chicago. Professor Haidt, thank you so much for joining us today.
What a pleasure. It's a great honor, and I'm just thrilled to be able to talk to the medical community. What we're going through is well, we need your help. We need doctors on board advising parents about what's going on.
Let me add this as well. I think, and I'm not trying to demonize these individuals, but I can't help but see the connection between a lot of this type of research and the offering up of the young generations to the medical industry, right? To biotechnology, to a lot of this new biotech infrastructure and new types of pharmaceutical drugs. Now, Haidt tends to speak against a lot of the so-called drugging, but again, we're moving into a new place regarding medicine and therapies and how we address the human and how we address health and disease. So I'm just saying, I also look at a lot of these guys and their research assisting in, I guess, the collection of young people's minds for bigger industries, right? Say whether that be drugs or programs, right? Getting kids into programs. I have my issues with diagnosis. I think diagnosing, especially children, though I do understand there's, I guess, some positives to it, it also can be hindering, right? It can hold a child back in many ways as far as what they're able to do in the world based on their diagnosis, or it could hold them back personally in that they live their life through their diagnosis. They identify with their diagnosis, which can be harmful over time. Now, it's a nuanced thing. It's a difficult and complex scenario because there's this thin line between children needing help, assistance, and maybe some evaluation, and of course exploitation, right? Abuse even. We see this all the time with misdiagnosis, right? So, yeah, faulty diagnosis, right? So it's really, really interesting. But overall, though I like a lot of the things some of these academics say, I always have to remind myself, and this is something I'll probably focus on more than anything, is the fact that these intellectuals, these academics, these high-level people doing these big works are actually contributing to the overall system in the swallowing up, this very Moloch-like machine, swallowing up of the children. Though I like a lot of the things Haidt has to say, I can't help but see these studies and this research being used to, in some way, to be exploited by the machine.
Well, your book really hit home with me as the father of two Gen Z daughters. I could really relate to it on a personal level, as I'm sure so many people in our audience will as well. Professor Haidt, we've talked a lot on the AMA update about the dramatic increase in depression, anxiety, and suicide among young people, but it's really been with a pandemic as a backdrop. But in your book, The Anxious Generation, you identify something else that was happening before the pandemic, and you call it the Great Rewiring of Childhood. Talk to us about that.
Sure. So
I think he might be going into what we had mentioned earlier. I forget who it was. Someone in the chat had mentioned this idea of, what was it? It might have been helicopter parenting, something that happened in the 90s. And he does a good job at kind of describing how that developed, where we see this bridge between Gen X and millennial children and how differently we were raised. And this had many reasons, right? Whether it be news media scaring parents or legitimate rise in crime in certain areas. But there was this change in the way children were raised to where they became more coddled, more isolated. And this actually caused quite a detriment to that generation. And as that happened, then they were introduced to all of these new technologies that further harmed them in their development and understanding of the world and their ability to socialize and identity growth and all these things. But anyhow, yeah, and of course, drugging children, right? Just inappropriately drugging children is all and has always been a horrible thing. Ritalin, I just think it's crazy to put children on any type of drug, especially when we're talking about like psychological drugs. That is very, very sad. But again, this is about industry. Right. We are subject to this type of model, this industrial model where humans are exploited for the gain and control of bigger systems. And that's the saddest part. Hence the importance of getting back to the more local way of doing things, family-based, and I would argue faith-based, so we could separate ourselves from some of these bigger systems.
In 2019, when I really started this project, it was clear something terrible was happening. This was pre-COVID. My previous book was called The Coddling of the American Mind, and it was about how we've been overprotecting our kids for a long time. They don't become anti-fragile, they become fragile. They don't develop independence. They're still a bit dependent when they arrive at universities. So I was already looking at how over-supervision, the loss of play, was leading to an increase in depression and anxiety. But there was something else going on. As I gathered all the data I could, I gathered all the studies, I gathered all the graphs of mental health trends, something amazing came out of it. Gene Twankey, another social psychologist, had already shown these sort of hockey stick shaped curves. If you graph out levels of anxiety, depression, especially anything internalizing disorders, anxiety, depression, what you find is that rates for teenagers were actually very stable from the late 90s all the way through 2010 or 2011. There's no sign of a problem. And all of a sudden in 2012, someone turns on a light switch and the numbers go shooting up. The rates, especially for girls, the rates anywhere from 50 to 100% increases, depending on what measures you're using. So that was already known from Jean Twengey's work. Around 2017, she came out with that. But what I began to discover is that the same thing was happening in the UK, Canada, Australia. It's happening in Scandinavia, and it all points to something around 2012, plus or minus a couple years. Now, you never see that. I mean, that would seem to indicate either somebody released a chemical, in the air in that year that somehow interfered with child development, or something happened that changed childhood around the world. And so that's where I really began focusing on what were their digital habits? How was childhood changing? And when you put it all together, what you see is the early internet in the 90s was marvelous, wonderful, amazing. Millennials grew up using it. Their mental health was fine. But it really changed between 2010 and 2015. This is the great rewiring. In 2010, hardly anyone had a smartphone. No, teenagers, it was just coming in, but they...
Okay. The great rewiring of 2010, the technological rewiring that came after this change in parenting. Yeah, this is what he discusses quite a bit. And this has to do with the onset of social media and a certain demographic of, I guess we can call them children, that were preteens into early teens that were on social media at this time. And that was the moment where everything changed. And we've talked about this in the past. I've showed you guys some graphs and some studies, and it looks to be the case, right? And I think with that is the introduction of the smartphone, because this made social media accessible at any time. Prior, when we were on Friendster back in the early 2000s, or MySpace or something like that, we were on a desktop. You only could go online when you were at the table sitting there. If there was only certain times of the day you could do this. But once the smartphones became more popular, especially by 2010, they were pretty much ubiquitous. I think the iPhone came out in 2007, and they were still pretty new. Of course, there were cell phones prior to the smartphone. So there was already this kind of culture or accepted habit of carrying around a communication device. And prior to that, of course, pagers, etc. But by 2010, most people had some type of cell phone or smartphone. So, and I've discussed this in some of my documentaries in the past, this merging of not just social media, not just the applications, but the actual device, the on-body device with ubiquitous internet service, the coupling of the two, this actual supercomputer with these new virtual communities on an application, putting those two together in the hands of a very young person is a type of drug. It is like giving crack to an individual.
They all had flip phones mostly. There was no Instagram. There was no front-facing camera. Most people didn't have high-speed internet. So you could not spend 10 hours a day on your flip phone. You'd use it, teens would use it to connect, and that's good. They can contact their friends. They meet up. That's great. That's 2010. 2015, everything's different. Now, almost the great majority have a smartphone, not a flip phone. They have high-speed internet with unlimited data plans. They have a front-facing camera. The girls especially are all on Instagram. And now they're not getting together anymore. The numbers that we now have are about 8 to 10 hours a day is what they spend on screens just for entertainment. We're not talking school or schoolwork. And half of all of our teenagers say that they are online almost all the time, which means they're not spending time with other kids. They're not putting their arm around other kids. They're not laughing with other kids. They're doing this all day long. And so I tried to put all that together in the book to convey this was not a gradual thing. Something was transformed around 2012, and it's hitting us all over the world. Teens, especially girls, are checking into psychiatric emergency wards, and we've got to roll this back.
Now, I think a lot of people kind of forget that quick rollout of all those technologies that you just talked about and what the kind of cumulative impact has been. And you mentioned kind of some of the harms that have been caused by that combination there. Talk to us a little bit about the 4 ways that you outline in the book that have translated into really affecting this generation.
Now, let's think about what's going on right now with China and TikTok, right? This whole back and forth. Of course, there's the whole DeepSeek thing. I'm going to be putting out a video on the main channel shortly. I was writing up the manuscript for it. Really interesting kind of techno-nationalist AI arms race stuff that's going on. That really is just, in my view, of course, to bolster this transition, to speed up the Great Reset under the guise of we got to beat China, this whole situation. But think about this, say, the last several weeks, this discussion about TikTok and the importance of privacy and how China wants to steal privacy, and they're spying on our kids, and the surveillance. The surveillance is a real thing, right? But I think what's important, and you guys know this, we're already under surveillance by our own government. And then we understand that, especially if you look at the infrastructure, go to Silicon Valley, you'll see how much real estate that China actually controls, or at least has money in and influence over. So you start to discover, based at the infrastructural level, all of these countries are working together. Now, it isn't to say there isn't infighting at certain levels. It isn't to say that there isn't some legitimate conflict or opposition at certain levels. But at the end of the day, at its surface, at its foundation, all of these countries, whether it's United States, Israel, China, we're all working together to forge this new world system of network states where everything is this type of mass digital Skynet style metaverse situation. And it's going to get to the point where the physical interaction and all of these things isn't even going to matter, because the interoperability of all of the technology, the networks, the devices, et cetera, the ubiquitous computing, the sensors, everything's going to be so interconnected that it's irrelevant regarding what's physical, borders and all of these things. It's all irrelevant because everyone is so close to each other, and everything is so easily to be accessed. And the danger of that is how easily they can manipulate the public by talking about hacking and all of this nonsense. Anyways, the point I'm getting at is it's fascinating to me how everyone's focusing on China and privacy and what have you. But I think what's more important is the fact that these technologies, whether they be owned by China or whoever, they're changing and as Haidt says, rewiring the brain. They're rewiring the generations. And though, of course, surveillance and privacy is important, it's the whole idea of smart devices, 24/7 accessibility of these types of applications, and the use of them. That's the actual problem. It's not who owns TikTok and what's happening to the data. It's why does TikTok even exist in the capacity that it does? And I understand we're in a capitalist society. It's it's a freedom and liberty, what have you. So there's really no changing that model, that system. But those are the questions that should be asked, in my view. I'm not saying that we should start banning everything, because that sets a whole new precedent of authoritarianism. But I think the fact that no one's addressing this at the cultural level, instead of doing things legally through banning and policy and all this stuff, let's just change the culture where everyone practices this new type of, say, anti-application culture. And again, that's ideal, right? I'm not saying it's realistic, but I think the problems we have are, for the most part, at a human scale, meaning we can fix these socially and culturally through our belief systems, our values, and the culture we practice in the world. We don't need big government or any technological system or corporation or software to help us with this. But again, we've gotten put in the position where we're so codependent, learned helplessness, the adult syndrome, and our children are strung out on these devices, that all we can do now is ask mommy and daddy network state to come fix things for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I made a long list of all the harms that I could find, all the studies that pointed to various harms. And I realized some are particular to girls, some are particular to boys, but there are 4 that are hitting everyone. Once you move from a play-based childhood based in the real world with experience to a phone-based childhood where almost everything is just looking at your screen, 4 big things happen to everyone, boys and girls. So the first is sleep deprivation. It's that simple. I mean, we all know when kids, if kids are missing, if you take half an hour of sleep a night away from kids, there's a long-term effect of that. And a lot of kids, the heavy users, we got to remember, about 5 to 12% of girls have what's called problematic use of social media. 5 to 12%, something like that, of boys have problematic use of video games, and I can't get a clear number for porn. It's probably in the same ballpark. So even if most kids aren't being harmed, 5 to 12% is a lot to have their lives taken over by this. So for the heavy users, it interferes with sleep. Actually, for a lot of them, it just interferes with sleep. That's one, and that's just so basic. We've got to stop that. So you can definitely advise your patients, no screens in the bedroom. When you and I were kids, most families had a rule: you can't have a television in a kid's bedroom. That would be crazy. But now they have everything in their bedroom. Sleep deprivation. The other is possibly the most important of all in terms of widespread effects, and that's social deprivation. It used to be that teenagers spent a lot of time with their friends. And there's the American Time Use Survey. We can chart out how much time people spend with their friends or eating or sleeping.
I'd say it's a lot higher than that. I'd agree with you, Joe Potter. Absolutely. Very, very understated here. But again, these guys are always playing it safe.
Really good data on that in the United States. And what you see is that teenagers used to spend 2 hours a day with their friends on average. while older people spent like 45 minutes because, we're married, we're busy. Well, guess what happens? As soon as you get the great rewiring, as soon as they get smartphones and social media, time with friends plummets before COVID. In fact, when COVID comes in and you have the lockdowns, you barely see any acceleration of the decline because Gen Z was social distancing since 2012. They began social distancing as soon as they got their smartphones. And we all know, and the Surgeon General has been so eloquent on this, loneliness is a killer. Loneliness, is more deadly than cigarettes in some.
So COVID only exacerbated the already developing social distancing that really started in 2012 with Gen Z's use of applications and smartphones. So by the time 2020 hit, it just made things, it took it to the 10th degree. And this is why we saw such a crash between 2020 and 2023 in the, I guess, the psychological and emotional state of the younger generations. And it's only getting worse, right? Especially with this whole metaverse crap and VR glasses, etc. Now it's going to go on your face, not in your hand, right?
Studies. So our kids are so lonely. Gen Z is the most connected generation in history, which means they're not spending time with other human beings. They are so lonely. The third harm is attention fragmentation. And that is, imagine if you never went 4 minutes without interruption. Imagine what life would be like. It's hard to imagine. Although we older people, we're getting there with group texts and texts coming in. But imagine if from the time you were 9, when you got your first smartphone, and you start going on social media and your friends and strangers are messaging you and you have to respond. So the inability to pay attention is really devastating for cognitive development and for academics. School achievement is declining around the world, not since COVID, since 2012. So we're getting sicker and stupider, frankly. This is true across the developed world. So attention fragmentation is the third harm. And the fourth harm is addiction, which I already mentioned. There's a debate, is it truly addiction? Well, if gambling is an addiction, gambling is a behavioral addiction. And if you're willing to say that some people have compulsive gambling, they ruin their fortunes, they ruin their family, they can't stop. Well, guess what? The social media was literally designed to copy slot machines. The thing where you pull down and it kind of bounces up, that was literally taken from slot machines as a design feature. So these things are designed to be addictive. They've been under refinement in the addiction labs of Meta and other companies. They're very good at what they do. And, 5 to 50% of our kids are, I think, truly addicted in ways that are severely damaging their development.
So what you've outlined in the book is this combination of we'll call it overprotection in the real world and underprotection in the online world. You said maybe no TV in the bedroom, but they still have access to everything.
This is a good point here. This idea of overprotection in the real world and underprotection online. Very, very good dynamic there that I agree with. But I will say this: there are reasons for the real world overprotection, though I think it goes overboard, right? Some parents are a bit over the top with the coddling and the isolation, but there is some reason for parents to give pause in 2025, especially compared to some of our parents in the early 80s. I mean, in 80, let's look at 85 and 2025, big difference. Right, we could do a lot more back then. Things were a little different, a lot simpler, less connected. Right, I'd even say people were a lot more stable then, in that everyone hasn't had their brains fried by constant psyops and social engineering and on these screens and everything. So I do understand it is a different time. And maybe we're just perceiving these things through the screens. Maybe there was just as much, even though we can look at the statistics and it appears as if violence is decreasing. But again, the statistics are so hard to fully trust just based on the modeling, et cetera. But let's just say this: maybe it's always been to some degree always violent, right? But and maybe we're just perceiving things are worse now because we're seeing more based on our exposure through the screens. Even if that's the case, we definitely are in a new time and a new era. So I do understand why parents would probably feel a little apprehensive as far as letting their kids just go outside all day and do whatever they want, even if we are perceiving things a certain way and say violence has always been around. I think the nature of violence today, or the nature of human behavior, is much different, and I would say in a negative way. We're further away from our values and our belief systems. Hyper progressivism has changed things such that we've lost touch with shame and guilt that we had in the 80s, right? We've lost touch communally as far as looking after one another. It's a lower trust society. So even if there's always been an element of violence, there's many other factors and variables we can look at. Some of these I've mentioned here, just the low trust, the low trust, high trust difference socially. We were more close knit, smaller communities, more local years ago. We looked after each other's children. I remember how it used to be. I mean, whether it be my neighbors or uncles, cousins, they would step in as my parents if I was out, and they would step up to the plate and look after us. And even, within reason, even discipline us, keeping kids in order, keeping kids in line. There was this responsibility, this culture of accountability. All of these things don't necessarily exist anymore, right? So if we're in a low trust society with less communal bonds, with less bonds at all, more distrust and distancing, and less values, less connection, I mean, I think that would set the stage for probably more dangerous scenarios to play out. At least it would increase the potential for them. So I do understand why some parents would go this route to be a little less apprehensive, but it's getting over the top. It's a bit overboard at this point. And as parents, what we really should be doing, not necessarily going back to the 80s and letting our kids leave the house in the morning and come back in the evening, but putting our children in physical things, physical environments, getting them back in touch with nature. We have to do the work, right? We have to make the extra steps and take the time, and we're responsible for it. So I think that's super important, putting our children in social environments as much as possible, because it's just a different time and a different world, and no one's going to make these changes outside of our own responsibilities and duties. Well, we know who will make the changes, and that's the government, right? That's these machines, that's these systems. They'll have some solution. They'll have some algorithm, right? They'll have some distractive technology to step in and handle things for us. So it's really on us as parents, as the older generations. It's our duty to step in here and try to help out these younger generations as much as possible. It's really on us.
Talk to us a little bit about the dangerousness of that combination.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So all mammals play, and they play a lot. And human children play a lot. And humans are really playful all the way up through their teen years. Even in their 20s, young people are very playful. And it's not a luxury. It's like you have to play to wire up the brain. And so kids should be out playing in the real world. The healthiest kind of play, research seems to show, is unsupervised free play, mixed age groups. You have to play different roles. You have to work out the conflicts. You learn to work things out. That's the healthiest for social and physical development. And when everything moves onto the online platforms, now there's no movement, just one finger. We're starting to get neck problems. Myopia is surging around the world because young people, you're supposed to be out. They're supposed to get sunlight. They're supposed to have long visions, through the forest, across a field. But there's much less time outdoors, much less time in nature, much less sunlight getting into their eyes and on their skin. And so it's affecting development in a lot of ways. What I came to see in writing the book, I thought it was going to originally be a book about social media harming girls, because that's where the evidence is clearest. But as I tried to tell the story, and as I tried to figure out the parallel story for boys, I realized it's not just girls on social media, boys on video games and porn. It's normal, healthy human childhood, which we evolved for and which we've had more or less for 50 million years, as long as however far back mammals go, it's that ending in a very short period of time. And part of why it ended is that in the 1990s, Americans, began the 80s, we freaked out about child abduction.
Yes, that's what it was. I was thinking Satanic Panic, but that was a little earlier. That was in like the mid 80s. Yes, it was. Do you guys remember this? Some of you that might be a little older. The milk cartons. I remember as a kid how scared I was. And, remembering my mother would always, kind of sit me down and give me a talking to strangers and all this stuff. Because I remember in the late 80s and early 90s, there was a lot of abduction stories. It might have been an op. It might have been a type of media psyop to transition us. But yes, now I remember that for sure. And he's mentioned this in the past. He actually mentions this in all of the work of his I've read. It's such an important point, and I tend to forget about that because that was big. That was very big.
It's extremely rare.
Oh, someone had mentioned, rarely see kids outside riding bikes or playing. They're addicted to cell phones and video games. It's horrible. I know, it's so true. I don't see kids playing at the basketball courts anymore. Coming up, that was the thing. You'd see the basketball courts are packed. You have to wait in line to get in a game. Like, you literally have to sit on the side and wait to get in. You'd see the sandboxes full, kids on their bikes everywhere, playing ball, girls playing hopscotch, jumping rope. It's so different now, and that's the part that saddens me the most. And it isn't to say there's no kids, but you'll see massive parks now, and there's just not a lot of kids there, and it is very troubling. It is troubling.
But we saw more stories about it on the news, in that many people remember the milk carts, the pictures on milk cartons of missing kids. Mm-hmm. So we freaked out about child abduction. We stopped letting our kids out. We didn't trust our neighbors anymore. And this was really in the 90s when this really happens. But guess what? Oh, we have a PC and we have a modem, and here, kid, you can go explore the virtual world. And at first it was marvelous. The early internet was amazing. And
I don't remember him mentioning this, but there is a class issue here as well, right? Especially during this time, there was only a small percentage of general families that had computers in the home. So many families didn't really experience any of this. I think this was more of a class-based phenomena until technology started to become more affordable, especially once cell phones and smartphones came out. You could even get free phones, and of course there's the Obama phone, which really boosted the ubiquity, which transcended class, right? The Obama phone and similar programs like it, which reminds me of the push in the third world, right? The massive tech initiatives you see in India and in Africa and in all over Asia, trying to close the digital divide, which is really just forcing these devices in the hands of innocent people. So there is that there too. It was a class thing, but as technology got cheaper, faster, and smaller, we see it diffuse out into the general population, and then we have a type of endemic scenario.
Again, millennials loved it, and they came out fine. And so this is why we were fooled. Most of us were techno-optimists. We thought the internet is amazing. I still think that. I love the internet. The internet's amazing. It's good for kids, we thought. Well, maybe the early internet was, but now, after time, everything gets corrupted. Sexual predators, extortion rings, it's the idea that our children are in communication with strangers around the world that we have no idea, we can't monitor it even, is completely insane. So my point is, we have vastly overprotected our kids in the real world where they need a lot more experience. We need to send them out. And we vastly underprotected them in the virtual world, which has...
That's where I didn't finish my point on that. So the overprotection, I can understand it a little bit today in 2025, given the nature of culture and low trust, et cetera, but that doesn't change the fact that we still need to pursue a physical and social experience for our children, though it can be a bit apprehensive due to the time. But that doesn't mean that we pull back and dial back and put the kids inside and give them games and these things. That seems to be what many families are doing. And listen, I think it's happening because many of the parents are actually dealing with their own addictions. It's not that they're choosing to bring their kids inside and put them in front of screens or put them in front of video games, but they are also struggling. We all are dealing with this to different degrees. So there's that. But the under protection online, I think, is key. For instance, everyone's talking about TikTok and privacy and China, whilst we have fully 24/7 accessible hyper pornography all over the internet, all over applications. It's on Twitter. I mean, it's crazy how accessible this stuff is, and no one has anything to say about it. We have young girls, young, innocent, impressionable, developing girls as young as 18 years old, and maybe even younger if they lie, on OnlyFans selling sexual images of themselves and performing for grown men. I mean, it's just absolutely disgusting. Yet we're concerned about some Chinese application stealing data and privacy. And, you know, what did they say? They were talking about it's brainwashing our children. It's like, okay, what about everything else? What about Instagram? That's brainwashing our children too. What about all of these other applications that are all intelligence, by the way? All of them. We just have to accept that, right? So, yeah, none of it makes sense. But then you understand, well, this is all industrial based. Everything really boils down to growth, efficiency, expansion, and control of resources, management, and, you know, this whole economic argument. But there's even deeper, a spiritual thing where Satan's winning with all this. He's winning. He's taking control over the entire population of people through their minds and their hearts. Yeah, distraction, right? Good to see you, Bar. And all the others in the chat. King of Kong, good to see you. Grape Tea News. Oracle of the West, good to see you. Peace to the fam. All right, let's continue.
Abortion rings, just all, I mean, it's the idea that our children are in communication with strangers around the world that we have no idea, we can't monitor it even, is completely insane. So my point is, we have vastly overprotected our kids in the real world where they need a lot more experience. We need to send them out. And we vastly underprotected them in the virtual world, which has zero safeguards, zero. The government has said companies are not responsible for age verification, and you can't sue them. If they show your daughter a lot of suicide stuff, what can we say? Section 230, they can show whatever they want. So again, we're in a completely unbelievable situation regarding the threats to our children from the online world, when they'd be much safer if we sent them out to play unsupervised.
So you have this huge disruption to the play-based childhood being substituted through this phone-based childhood. Mm-hmm. And it's clear from the statistics that you point out in the book that there has been a lot of damage. What can we do to help the young people who have been affected? And is that a different set of steps than to prevent this from those going forward?
Yeah. So, you know, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And for parents whose kids are still in elementary school, it's so easy what to do. You just have to delay entry. Don't get into the game of, well, we gave him a phone, but we put on these controls and he got around the controls. So delay is the only way. Just delay when they get on delay when they get a smartphone, delay that till high school. No kid before high school should have a smartphone, give them a flip phone, and delay when they get on social media, at least to 16. So it's easy for the younger kids. Now, what do we do for the older Gen Z? My kids are 14 and 18. What do we do for the kids who've had phones and been on social media? What I'm finding, because I teach a course at NYU at Stern, in the business school, I teach a course called Flourishing. And it's 35 undergraduate students. They're mostly sophomores, about 19 years old. And most of them have real problems with their phone. One student in my class was using just TikTok, with 6 hours a day, just TikTok, just TikTok. Imagine 6 hours a day of 15-second videos. There's no time.
Oh my goodness, guys. Wow. I mean, I've read these stats, but when you hear them, it's just 6 hours. I can't really scroll. You know, the only scrolling I actually do is whenever I'm on Twitter, and that's painful for me to do. I can't do it for very long. I give myself whenever I'm doing research on Twitter, I'll give myself 30-minute blocks. And once that I time myself and everything, because you could keep going and lose track of time, for one. And two, I feel a type of, I don't want to call it pain, but there's just a strange cycle, or like, I don't know how to explain it. It's just this weird brain thing that feels weird and strange for me, to where it's like overworking. It's like, I don't know. It's this crazy info glut, I guess is a good way to put it. It's just too much at once. Anyhow, 6 hours, man. 6 hours scrolling through TikTok. And TikTok is different. I mean, I guess it depends on your algorithm and what you're normally looking at. But imagine just what most kids are looking at. They're not educating themselves like I tend to do for the most part. If I'm ever scrolling through anything, I'm trying to learn about something. I don't get my entertainment from scrolling. I get my entertainment from maybe anxiety is part of it too, Barry. It's a hard thing to describe because it's a mixture of things. It's not just anxiety. It's a mixture of things after a short period. But for me, I get my entertainment from watching old movies and old sitcoms and, stuff like that. Yeah, sometimes I'll watch some funny stuff on YouTube here and there. But there's other ways to get entertainment. And I know today the popular way to get entertainment is through these short little quick bit funny clips on shorts and on TikTok. I've never transitioned into that experience. So for me, I can't even understand how someone's brain could handle that. So when I hear this, it's painful. And then you consider these are young children that their brains are developing. Their identities are developing, their understanding of the world, and even just their perception is in its developmental stages. So it's just so sad. Man.
Time for anything else, and it's just the things it does to the reinforcement system, the dopamine neurons, so a lot of them are having trouble, and it's very hard to fix this by yourself. Like, what are you going to do? Say, I'm going to get off social media and then I'm alone. But if you do it in a small group, then it's actually much easier. And so what I found from teaching this course for a number of years now is the most essential first step is young people, they have to regain their attention. Most of them have given away all of their attention.
Yes, this is so important, regaining the attention. My method is to go back to other ways we used to enjoy our time. I agree with the delaying for sure. Delay as much as possible. But I would also argue go back to how we used to do stuff. What did we do back in the 80s when we were just by ourselves? We didn't have televisions, right? Maybe in your living room, or maybe you did have a television, but you couldn't access it because mom or dad was watching it or your older brother was watching it. So what would you do? And let's say aside from going outside, what would you do inside? You would read. You would draw. You would build something. You would do something with your hands. I had Legos. I used to play with blocks and stuff. I used to draw a lot. That's what I spent most of my childhood doing, drawing. I would just draw stuff, color pencils, pens, just draw things, and read. I had a really nice Encyclopedia Britannica set, and I would just sit and go through it and enjoy learning about random crap. I would literally spend hours just thumbing through my encyclopedia collection my parents got me when I was young. And that was probably one of the greatest things I had growing up. I loved it. And I would read. I would just read, or draw or make something. This is where we need to go. We need to instill this type of being and doing in the world. This type where we have this mixture of creativity, but also learning and fun mixed in one, right? Because what I've noticed is with the scrolling and the automated content that's very quick and it's entertaining. Let's not get it twisted. I mean, a lot of this stuff, you could get stuck on a TikTok watching all of these funny, very creative videos. I mean, these people are creative. I'm not going to take that away from them. It's entertaining stuff, but it's mind rot after some time. And what it does is it takes away it's passive and mindless entertainment to where you're not engaging with it. It's like what is it? These alpha waves and you're not engaging with it really. You're just passively watching it, and you're not really thinking, you're not having any type of creative fun, and there's no imagination involved. It's empty in the back of the mind there. You're just viewing. You know, when you're reading, there's imagination slowly building what you're reading in your mind. When you're drawing, or when you're building something with your hands, or when you're playing some type of game, you're using your imagination, and your mind is thinking and tinkering inside there. There's activity going on. There's neural pathways and synapses and et cetera that are firing off. You know, opposed to when you're just mindlessly droned out looking at endless entertainment. These are two polar opposite ways of operating in the world. And I'm not saying you should never, view this type of content, but I'd say you should never view it if you don't have some grip on it and you're not able to operate with these types of technologies in a way that's responsible and mature. And children just don't have that, right? So that's what I say. We got to get back to these more old school ways of entertaining ourselves and just doing things in the world. Technology has replaced a lot of that, unfortunately. So there has to be balance, right? Because listen, we were young, we watched movies, we watched cartoons, I still do to this day. But there's a balance. You know, we have a physical life. I have a reading life. I have a creative life. These are things that I take time out of my day to do and to focus on and to deliberately engage with. It's very easy to just open the phone and flip through 100,000 videos in a couple hours. You know, that's easy. That doesn't take much effort. And I think this creates an atrophy. And he talks quite a bit about this.
They never have a moment to think, to reflect, to daydream, because it's just they have to be consuming content all day long. Again, half of all teens say they're online almost constantly, almost every minute. iPhones are waterproof now. I'm told that some kids take it into the shower so you can keep swiping while you're in the shower. Imagine never having a moment to think. So there's no hope if that's the way your life is. You're not going to amount to much, and you're at much higher risk for anxiety and just social dysfunction. So that's the first thing. As I say, let's turn off almost all your notifications. I get them to see that their attention is the most precious resource they have, and they can't get more of it. So, who are you going to give it away to? You're going to give it away to every company that pings you 20 times a day. So regain control of your attention. To get social media off of your phone. If you need it on your computer, for starters, do that. And eventually, some of them get off entirely. Once they regain 3 to 5 hours a day of time, now there's room to do things like more exercise, or going out with friends more, or practicing their social skills. A lot of them are very shy. A funny thing about Gen Z is that a lot of them are very afraid to make a phone call because that's live, that's awkward. They're used to texting, which is asynchronous. Mm-hmm. So they know that they need to practice their skills. So anyway, my point is, if you went through puberty with a phone-based childhood, it probably changed your brain. That's what sensitive periods are. Puberty is massive, rapid brain rewiring. Probably change your brain. But if you work on it in your early 20s, your brain is still plastic enough that I think we get amazing results in the class. So there definitely is hope. But if you don't do anything, if you just continue on spending 5 hours a day on social media, I think you're going to be less than you would have been. And I think we're seeing the greatest destruction of human capital and potential in human history outside of the 2 world wars, because this is happening on a vast scale. Young people have basically given up all their attention to a few companies, Meta and TikTok, and then Google and YouTube. They largely own almost all young people. I don't know about almost all, but more than half of their conscious attention, something like that, something in that ballpark.
That's creepy. That is creepy when you think about that degree of ownership or influence and control over the minds of generations, not just Gen Z, millennials and us Gen Xers too, boomers as well. We're all part of this. It's just some of us are less affected, at least at the developmental level, like young people, right, that are changing into something different over time. But think about that. Just a few companies, hence content creation as culture creation. It's literally shaping the cultures we start to practice. Haven't you all noticed viral movements on social media and trends and stuff become a real world physical experience. You start seeing people in the real world saying these things and acting out these things, and it changes the way we behave. Isn't that fascinating? To see how some silly little thing someone said online will start to express itself through through our collective behavior in the real world. It's so fascinating. Recently, we were out at a park, with the kids and just chilling and relaxing, and we were speaking with a family, and I mean, it just blew me away. They were going on and on about Trump, and I have my opinions for sure. Yeah, I am a conservative, but I'm for the most part apolitical. I stay out of it because I know the whole paradigm is false. It's all a bunch of social engineering. So I just like to listen to what people say. I don't really have much of an opinion out in public, right? Because I just know the game, and it's just amazing to hear the talking points of just a general person out in the world today. And it's like, wow, it's like you've just been on Instagram all day. You've been watching Fox News or you've been watching CNN. It's just mind blowing. The parroting. And I know there's no real actual thinking going on here. It's the screens, it's whatever they're flipping through every day is shaping their perspective, and they act it out in the real world. Hence culture creation. We have this new, very dichotomous culture, polarized culture of conservatism and progressivism, and they're both extremely flawed in so many ways, but they are just outcomes or expressions of that which goes viral online. And it's at the looking at the social engineering aspect of it is very, very interesting, but almost a bit sad when you're in the physical, trying to engage and interact with people in the world, and you feel like you're still on, you feel like you're watching some propaganda online, but it's a real person in front of you spewing it. That's the part where I start to consider this idea of us humans are now the artificial intelligence. We are now the artificial intelligence, right? As everyone's just an expression of whatever algorithm they've developed over the past several years. Interesting times.
So that has to change.
Professor Hyde, not surprisingly, physicians are seeing the impact of this mental health epidemic. And with a shortage of specialists, a lot of pediatricians and primary care physicians have had to deal with increasingly complex mental health issues. Mm-hmm. How can physicians better screen for or address the negative impact?
Quickly here, great point by King Sir the Boss. I'm actually going to be covering this pretty soon. We're going to be doing a little segment here on nostalgia, but you are so correct. I've noticed a lot of children under 18 are nostalgic. In my opinion, they're too young to be that way. I believe social media steals from them. Yes, it does. Absolutely. There's a whole phenomenon with this, and I'm glad you're bringing this up because I'm going to be covering this. But it's almost like a phantom nostalgia or phantom memory. I'm making this term up. This is how I kind of define it in my mind. This idea of like a phantom memory, missing something you've never experienced. And I think this has to do with the fact that a type of consistent, how can I say this? A type of consistent narrative, right, has been in a sense robbed from them or disrupted because of this online culture, right? So for those of us that are older, we have this consistent narrative of experiencing the world, going out, doing things, forming relationships, these very foundational human things that are a requirement to feel whole, right? We all have that for the most part. Now, you imagine a young person that, say, very young, say a teenager today, that whole history of youth had been disrupted by the screens and the viral stuff. Now, for their view, it's online, it's the online culture. It's like the internet culture is their culture. So it's not like they don't even know what they miss, but they know they're missing something. And so they get very, very nostalgic for this past. Now, I've seen two levels of this. There's this nostalgia for their internet culture of their youth, which is huge. That's probably the most seen one. But then there's this really interesting subculture where they're nostalgic for, say, our childhood. Those of us that say grew up in the 80s, they're heavily into 80s and 90s culture that they've never experienced. And I think for me, that speaks to this disruptive or this disrupted childhood that it's almost like they could sense the childhoods we kind of lived through looking back, whether that be looking at old films, watching old shows. And in a way, they have this nostalgia for something they've never experienced. And from my view, it's at a very deep human level. It's a deep human social thing. It's like, to keep it simple, because it's a bit complex, but it's like they're subconsciously aware of what's been taken away from them socially and replaced by technology. And so they're nostalgic for those social experiences that were taken away from them. And I think that's described by a lot of this really, really intense nostalgia culture. Yeah, and then there's the music element involved. There's so many things involved. It's a really, really interesting phenomena that's happening. I'm so thankful you brought that up, because we will be going into this idea, because I'm a very nostalgic person, as you can just tell by the work that I do. And I think nostalgia is very fun. And I think it can be, it could add to one's life, but it can also be a curse, or should I say, it can harm, right? It could become a type of distraction even from reality. And I think this is what we're bordering on with a lot of the culture today, because this idea of hyper real, things are so hyper real due to the internet and the online, and the blending of reality and online in the online world, the blending of the physical and the digital. It creates these strange phenomenons that we don't necessarily understand yet, but we see them, and they give us ideas. And so I think what we're all doing, as we're all watching this play out, all of us together, we're all watching this play out, and it's giving us these ideas. And it's, I think, very important that we come together and talk about them like we do here. So great one. Let's see. Urshman says, enable raids, brother made by Jim Bob was trying to send his chat over. Oh, really? A shout out to Jim Bob, man. That guy's funny. I had no idea. I didn't even know he was aware of the work we do over here. I don't even understand how to enable raids. Honestly, I swear, man, I study tech, but I'm so low tech, it's ridiculous. I don't know how to do that. So I'll look into that. I appreciate that, though, the acknowledgement, man. That's cool. That's cool, man. Shout out to Jim Bob. He has the funniest memes, I swear. They're so funny. I used to use a lot of them too, man. Back during COVID, he was just killing it with those memes. And my show openers, I would use a lot of memes back in like 2021, et cetera. And I remember I would usually have at least one or two of his, because they're just really on point. Anyhow, no raids on YouTube, says the Speak Uneasy. Yeah, I don't know much about that, honestly. I don't know anything. I've heard of this idea, but yeah. Anyway, so let's get through this, man. We read it back just a little bit more. But yes, this idea of nostalgia, it's so important, especially with the younger ones. And I think another element of that is it's this idea of the internet being, as Bourdieu would say, it like ends history, because there is no longer history. It's this ever present. You could look at the past, you could I guess project into the future and experience the present all through the internet. Like, think about this, guys, especially Gen Z or anyone today. You can go back and almost find anything historically online. It blurs the whole concept of the past and history. So I think this would also kind of affect the memory in some strange way that would probably create a phantom memory or a phantom nostalgia. So fascinating, man. How do I feel about the Orthodox movement? Jim Bob, J. Dot. Oh yeah, and like Crucible, all that. We've talked about this in the past. For me, and I know people are going to disagree with me, and that's fine. I'm not one to be so hung up on this debate, right? Because for me, and I won't give my theological arguments just because I don't think they really matter. I think your salvation is very personal, and I think it's something we all need to. Uh, it's something we all need to be searching for and through in fear and trembling. Like for me personally, guys, like I am too preoccupied and concerned about my own salvation and trying to live Christ-like. And I would love to get into the kingdom. Okay. I pray every day that I make it to the kingdom. I'm trying to take care of my family, raise a Christ-like, righteous, God-fearing family. I'm trying to walk in Christ. I'm trying to be the best I can be in this life. I'm not worried or trying to convince someone of what they need to be doing. I think those debates are very pointless. Now, if you want to talk about Mormonism, that's different, right? Now, some people would say Mormonism and Orthodoxy, Catholicism's all, it's all reprobate. Listen, that's not my lane. I'm not going to tell somebody else what they should believe. I think Scripture's plain. I think Scripture is very plain and simple. And I think what God wants and expects of us is very clear, and it doesn't need to be complicated. And I think a lot of this theology stuff gets very intellectual and heady. And I understand, people are designed and built that way to be preoccupied with these types of things. But that's not something that I think is very important. I look at it like this: we're all going to be accountable, and God will judge. So my whole view is that's basically how I look at it. I don't have any problem. I do think it's a bit unfortunate how they really target Protestants and all of this stuff. I just don't think God's going to be very concerned with those things. I think we overestimate what we think we know when it comes to those things. And I went to seminary. I've spent, when I started my work, it was really focused on theology, but, I had to humble myself because I think we know what Scripture says about these things, So I think I'm leaning on being humble and humility and, working out my salvation and just fear and trembling and trying my best to get my walk straight. I don't feel like I'm in the position to be telling other people, your belief system is wrong, even though I have my personal views on it. I just don't think this level of debate and divide is important. I think, especially attacking other Protestants, I think that's a waste. Now, debating atheists and Gnostics, I think that's great work, right? But outside of that, I think it gets a little dangerous, So that's how I feel about the work that they do as far as the divide they make between the Protestants and the Orthodox and the church and the old church and all. I don't think God's concerned with that personally. And if I'm wrong, I'll deal with that. But yeah. That's how I feel about it. I think if anything, we need to get together and fight this beast machine of, degeneracy and Satanists, and atheists and transhumanists and futurists and stuff. That's what I think is most important under Christ, right? That's how I look at it. Because, we're all going to have to deal with the Most High. We're all going to have to deal with that. So be careful what you're out here talking, man. Be very careful. Because, we need to be concerned with not the flesh, but the soul, It's very simple. That's how I look at it. Scripture is very plain, very simple. We don't need all the bells and whistles. We don't need all the history and all of that. Now, I do understand they'll get into the logical arguments, I understand all of that. All of that makes sense. But I think God has prepared it as such. It's far more simple than I think a lot of these intellectual Christians make things out to be. It's far simpler. Anyhow, good question. I got love for all my brothers in Christ, man. That's how I look at it. And we'll all deal with him. And some of us are wrong, but some of us are right. And time will tell. But I put my faith in Christ, and I've changed. He's changed me. So no religion is going to change that. Period. So let's continue.
Not surprisingly, physicians are seeing the impact of this mental health epidemic. And with a shortage of specialists, a lot of pediatricians and primary care physicians have had to deal with increased.
I absolutely believe in the triune Godhead. Absolutely. If I were to claim, I think Reformed Christianity is pretty on point, but again, I don't like to really step into those areas because I believe we start to intellectualize, and it could be dangerous. But I absolutely, I'm not a universalist, none of that. I do believe in the triune Godhead for sure. And I know that's a debate too between Christians. It's messy. We got all kind of fights popping off, man. It's really unfortunate. People need to be working out their salvation. I'll tell you that right now, because that's what's important. And raising our kids up the same way. That's what's important. Unfortunately, people might realize later in life they wasted a whole lot of time. But it is what it is.
I think, you're going to be less than you would have been. And I think we're seeing right now, the greatest destruction of human capital and potential in human history outside of the two world wars, because this is happening on a vast scale. Young people have basically given up all their attention to a few companies, Meta and TikTok, and then Google and YouTube. They largely own almost all young people. I don't know about almost all, but, more than half of their conscious attention, something like that, something in that ballpark. So that has to change.
Professor Hyde, not surprisingly, physicians are seeing the impact of this mental health epidemic. And with a shortage of specialists, a lot of pediatricians and primary care physicians have had to deal with increasingly complex mental health issues. Mm-hmm. How can physicians better screen for or address the negative impacts of social media during routine visits? It's not like there's a lot of time in these visits. What advice do you have for them?
Well, first, the biggest impact you could have, again, prevention is so much more powerful here than therapy or cure. The biggest impact you could have is to speak up. If the AMA, the American Association of Pediatrics, speak up about this, do your internal research. I'll help you. I'll point you to the research.
Absolutely. The gospel is all that truly matters. Even so, Lord, come quickly. At the end of the day, that's what matters the most, the gospel. Amen. Absolutely.
Have for them?
Well, first, the biggest impact you could have, again, prevention is so much more powerful here than therapy or cure. The biggest impact you could have is to speak up. If the AMA, the American Association of Pediatrics, speak up about this, do your internal research. I'll help you. I'll point you to the research. Make a statement that kids just should not be doing this. They should not be on social media. They should not be having a phone-based childhood. So making public statements, if doctors get on board here, as the Surgeon General has been fantastic here. If the AMA and individual doctors would back him up and say, look, what we're seeing tells us the Surgeon General is right. That's the most important thing for the country. Now, as for your individual practices, I think it's very important to talk to the parents about the habit, talk to the parents and the kids, young people, about their digital habits. Addicts will lie. So if a boy has a porn addiction, he's not going to tell you. Now, the parents might not know, but if a boy has a video game addiction, the parents will know. They'll know that he's spending 5-6 hours a day on video games. That has to stop. There's no way to go through adolescence 5 hours a day of video games. And I shouldn't say no way, but there are going to be effects, and they're going to be limiting or reducing. So first you have to get a handle on their digital consumption and digital addictions, or at least problematic use. I wouldn't even focus so much on content. What are you watching is important, but I would especially look for what's taking up your time. If there's anything that is taking up 3-4 hours a day, like YouTube videos or anything else, even if they're nice videos, that's a real problem. Conversely, what's their activity level? Are they playing sports? Are they having good time in person with their friends? So you want to look, you want to really judge to what extent does this kid have a play-based childhood versus a phone-based childhood? And
very important. Balance. Balance is key. We know we're in the super modern technological age. We're not going to be able to remove technology completely. But if a child has been brought up such that they have a significant play-based experience, it's going to be engineered into them. It's going to be part of their design. And that is a problem, I think, with some of the younger generations. They don't have that. So it's important to keep that balance and give them that opportunity.
if it's phone-based, I would urge you to talk with the parents and the kid and to try to cultivate healthier habits and to, as much as possible, delay the phone-based childhood. Give the brain a chance to wire up. Early puberty is so sensitive, so delicate, so important. We can't give early puberty to random strangers on TikTok.
Now, we've talked a lot about the harms of social media, potentially for young people, but what about the positive side of this? Do you have any kind of guidance to have a more positive relationship with social media?
Yeah, I keep hearing about the benefits, but no one can really tell me what they are. That is, they say, oh, well, it makes them feel more connected. Well, yes, it does that by taking all of their attention and decimating their in-person contact. So the more connected a kid is, especially it's more of a groupish thing, the more connected a generation or group is, the lonelier they're going to be if they're connected through addiction-based, algorithm-driven platforms. So I don't buy it for a moment that it actually makes them more connected. It gives them very low-quality connections. Imagine having low-quality connections to 1,000 people versus high-quality connections to 3 people. Which kid is healthier? So I don't believe that. Oh, and then, it helps them find information. Really? Google couldn't do that? You have to have an algorithm-driven, addiction-designed thing to give you content? What's another one that they say? Those are some of the main ones. So, if we're talking about 18-year-olds or 21-year-olds, we adults, we can use these platforms for our purposes. I'm on Twitter because it's useful to me. I can network on Twitter. When my son was 12, he had no need to network. He had no need to talk to strangers. He had no need to communicate with his friends through an algorithm-driven platform.
Very important point. I make a similar argument quite often. There's no purpose for this type of tech with children, right? No reason. Yes, social media can be useful for many different things, especially for a working adult, but they really are pointless. I'd even say for young people. Let's go back. There was many of us lived many years with no social media, all the way through junior high, all the way through high school, and even college. Even college, no social media, well, at least for me. So we don't need it. We got by just fine, didn't we? Had all types of good times, made all types of great friends, and we're better for it. I think it's a very important point. There's no rational reason at all for children and young people to even have this. It's become a culture. That's the problem. It's become culturally accepted and popular and conditioned into the generations, literally conditioned. Oh, what? You're not on social media? Are you even real? You guys remember that one? It's crazy.
Let them call them up and talk on the phone and get together. So I really don't buy it. The bar, I have to go through so much to prove the harms. And people can say, oh, well, you can't prove it. Oh, it's correlation, it's not causation. So I'm going through so much to prove the harms. But on the benefit side, people just say, oh, well, it makes them more creative. Oh, it makes them more connected. Like, no, it doesn't. Show me the evidence that Gen Z is more creative.
Not surprisingly, Professor Hyde, you see this as more than a book. You see your work as part of a movement that's very, very important. When you see states starting to make changes, or yesterday a big article in the Washington Post outlining some of these regulations that are changing, do you feel like your message is getting traction?
Oh, my goodness. Yes, it's been so wonderful to see that the world was ready for change. I just happen to be very lucky in my timing. The world was ready for change. All over the developed world, family life has become a fight over screen time. Everyone hates it. Everyone could see something was wrong. We could all see an 11-year-old kid, a girl will go off to her bedroom and not come out for hours. You don't know what she was doing there. You don't know who she was talking to. Something's wrong. Everybody could see this. And what's especially exciting is In red states, they could see this and their governors are acting. In blue states, they could see this and their governors are acting. In Congress, they can see this and there's bipartisan support for KOSA, the Kids Online Safety Act, and the new versions of it. So I'm actually absolutely thrilled at what's happening, because it's not just here. Same thing's happening in the UK, Australia. There's movement in a lot of other European countries, and Brazil.
Yeah, I have an article. I'll eventually be using it for one of the shows here. I'm trying to see if it's accurate. Someone from down under, let me know, because I have an article stating that they have some new laws that are outlawing, or I guess making it. I don't know if it's illegal. I don't know exactly what the I guess I don't know the details fully, but apparently children in high school or teenagers aren't allowed to use social media, something like this. I wanted to do a little more research before I pulled it out, because it almost sounds like a little bit too good to be true. It's like, what do you mean? This can't be true. But yeah, there are changes happening, and I think it's because we're seeing the fallout. We're seeing the damage. People want to do something about it, so I think it's great. And I try to contribute to this too with my work. And since we first started this channel, I've always focused on these developmental aspects of culture and society and the identity, whether it be child rearing and technology. And I had no idea things would get this crazy. I wasn't expecting TikTok. When we first started talking about this stuff in around 2016, 17, I think TikTok was out, but it really didn't take off till 2018. And then I think 2019, when it started to really blow into 2020, especially post-COVID, I did the TikTok documentary. What was it called? Trauma behind the application, or trauma behind TikTok, or something like that, where I was kind of going into some of my ideas. That's where I introduced the Cadult syndrome concept. And yeah, it's just been taken off. And then after that, we did the strangest youth culture in history, where I covered my concept of the cluster B society, and how technology, especially social media, was causing kids to be extremely narcissistic and display these very cluster B traits, right? Whether that be histrionics, or histrionic behavior, or antisocial behavior, narcissistic behavior, etc. And things have just gotten much, much worse because of the scamdemic, because of the quarantining and taking children away from their ability to graduate and their ability to go out and do things during very important years, especially anyone who was in high school during COVID. I mean, that had to be wild. I can't even imagine that. I can't even imagine that experience. So it's fascinating to see how all of this is happening, but it's troubling at the same time. But the good thing is, and always a little bit of optimism here, people are waking up, families are going back, we're getting into these more low-tech ways, we're making networks, we're considering our children's future in a way that we've never done before. And for some, we've been doing it from the beginning, but for many, they're just getting on board. And the good thing is, it's not too late. It's never too late, even if your children are teenagers. I mean, there's things you can do. It's not going to be easy, that's for sure. But there's things we can do. And it's really on us. Us older generations, it's on us. It's our duty.
So this is a global rebellion against these 3 or 4 companies that have somehow taken our children's attention and childhood, and they won't give it back. And so we have to have age gating. We have to work together.
Yes, Vine. Yeah, Vine was what started it all, actually. I've totally forgot about Vine. Vine really kicked it off, and then I guess they went out of business. And interestingly, Musk has brought up Vine, talking about he wants to revamp it. I wonder why. Vine was the first to really start this TikTok scrolling short clip kind of stuff. From my memory, it was Vine. I'm sure there were other smaller platforms, but Vine, yes. And it was more comedy. And I remember, actually, now that I think back, it was some pretty funny stuff. Very creative. Guys were doing these really interesting, funny clips, and there was nothing like it ever before. It wasn't as toxic and just zany as TikTok. It was more focused on bits, like comedy bits, at least from my memory. And it came and went pretty quickly. But yeah, TikTok showed up and changed everything.
The world was ready for change. I just happened to be very lucky in my timing. The world was ready for change. All over the developed world, family life has become a fight over screen time. Everyone hates it. Everyone could see something was wrong. We could all see an 11-year-old kid, a girl will go off to her bedroom and not come out for hours. You don't know what she was doing there. You don't know who she was talking to. Something's wrong. Everybody could see this. And what's especially exciting is in red states, they could see this and their governors are acting. In blue states, they could see this and their governors are acting. In Congress, they can see this and there's bipartisan support for COSA, the Kids Online Safety Act, and the new versions of it. So I'm actually absolutely thrilled at what's happening, because it's not just here. Same thing's happening in the UK, Australia. There's movement in a lot of other European countries, and Brazil. So this is a global rebellion against these 3 or 4 companies that have somehow taken our children's attention and childhood, and they won't give it back. And so we have to have age gating. We have to work together. If we act collectively, I think this is the key to the success of my book. Was I didn't just, as you can see, I'm pretty gloomy about what's happened, but it wasn't just a gloom and doom book, because part 4 of the book, the last part, is no matter what's happened so far, we actually can fix it. We can get out. It doesn't cost any money. We just have to do 4 norms. With 4 norms, we can escape, because we have to do it collectively. The reason that everybody gives their 10 or 11-year-old a smartphone is because everybody else gave them a smartphone. We don't want our kid to be left out. So with 4 norms, we can roll this back. Norm number 1, no smartphone before high school. Norm number 2, no social media before 16. Norm number 3, phone-free schools. And that's happening very rapidly across the country and around the world. And number 4, far more independence, free play, and responsibility in the real world. And that's really crucial, because if we're going to take the phones away, a delay, so that 10-year-olds aren't spending 10 hours a day on their phone, what are they going to do? We have to give them back a real childhood in the real world. Oh, and here's another area where AMA and AAP could be so helpful to make very clear statements on the importance of.
Absolutely, Emmanuel. Good to see you. This was I don't remember. You might have been there, but yeah, we were talking about this. Gosh, I can't remember which show, and it was a while ago. But absolutely, this, just like the immigration thing, right? It's along that same type of play, right? We got to protect the children. Great for digital ID, right? Transparency, very similar to voter ID. I think a lot of this voter ID and the immigration thing is for a digital ID push. Just another reason to create digital IDs, because they're interoperable, they're networked, they're remotely accessed, and it just makes it easier. It's quick, it's immediate, right? It doesn't require anything physical. And then we get into the biometrics. I have a bunch of biometric articles that are suggesting they do this. We collect the biometrics of children, and they use these to get online, so we can map and manage and track everywhere they are. Yep, absolutely. Rationalize digital ID to protect minors. This is it's an argument a lot of these companies have made and introduced in legislature. Nothing has been necessarily passed just yet, and I think it's because of the privacy issue. Right? And a lot of these biometric AI systems that they'd love to use in government are still coming up against the privacy issue. So we still have this privacy conscious culture that is giving pause to a lot of this. But again, all they need is a certain crisis, so we will see.
Play, outdoor play, risky play in the real world. And that's really crucial, because if we're going to take the phones away, a delay, so that 10-year-olds aren't spending 10 hours a day on their phone, what are they going to do? We have to give them back a real childhood in the real world. Oh, and here's another area where AMA and AAP could be so helpful to make very clear statements on the importance of play, outdoor play, risky play. I'm not sure if you can say that, but risk is actually an essential feature of childhood play. Kids need risk. They seek it out. Once they master a skill, they make it a little harder. They climb a little higher. They try juggling 4 things. I mean, they need challenge and risk. And so anything that doctors can do to make it clear to parents, like, if you want your kid to be healthy, you have to gradually let go. You have to give them more independence. Let them have more free play.
Spot on, man. Such a good talk. I know you guys are familiar with his work. We've discussed it quite a bit, and we'll be going into this book. Actually, I'm putting together a lecture for the Patreon of Locals, where I will be using his book and a few others, and just creating a system, right? Borrowing from a lot of these different thinkers and creating a system that I personally use in my home, and one that I would love others to check out, because we're all dealing with this, guys. All of us, every single one of us, whether we have children or not, we're dealing with some degree of this type of technological capture, and we have to do something about it. And I try to do part of that work. So I appreciate all of you guys that continue to support the show. And if you haven't supported the show, please support the show and tip your server as you would in any other establishment. So we're going to continue this tomorrow, because I have a bunch of other stuff. That clip lasted a little longer than I wanted it to. So we got a bunch of clips for tomorrow, because I just have some follow-up things to build off of that. So I'm glad we at least got to get through that whole thing, because I think that is just a very basic and standard take on some of what we're dealing with. I have a lot of other views and other perspectives and other angles, but I think this is general information, especially any parent needs to know. But I think anybody in general needs to be aware that this is happening, and this is some ways it's come about. And these are some of the variables and factors playing in as far as sleep deprivation, lacking social experiences, lacking play, physical experience, a play-based childhood, as well as attention. These several things he focuses on. And then I have my angles that I focus on that I'll bring into the fore as well. But we're in a really interesting time, because as especially the younger generations are getting integrated into this system through culture and the hijacking of their attention, it's also changing them as humans, hence this transhumanist aspect of it, right? It's changing us. It's changing us at a fundamental level. So it's something that it's very important stuff. There's a lot of important issues going on. I try to touch on what I believe are the most important issues, and this is definitely one of them. Our experience with and without technology, and the importance of balance therein. And what we see today is quite the opposite, right? It's quite the opposite. What we're seeing today is pretty extreme. It's like all or nothing, and it's mostly all, right? Because very few people are out there not interacting with this stuff and out in the real world living as we used to. So this, this is legitimate. This is a real footage from Japan, Tokyo. Yeah, rainy day in Tokyo, night walk. Yeah, this is real footage. I'll let you guys know any footage that's not real, because you're right, that Real Engine stuff is crazy, or Unreal Engine. You can't even tell with some of this stuff. So I'll definitely be letting you guys know. The only animated I used to use, it's been a little while, on the music channel I use it, the Cyberpunk 2077, I think. I use some of that footage. It's just so cool looking. The way it looks is actually pretty cool. And just the way they depict the future, it's pretty interesting to me. Yeah, Tokyo's beautiful. I love Tokyo. Great place, and a very interesting culture and environment to study human technology interfacing, right? It's because though it's highly technological, very collective, it's also traditional, and still in many ways very what some would call backwards or old school. And though that's changing slowly, it's this really interesting balance. When you go there, most places it's cash, coins and cash still, right? And then you look at some of their other systems, and they're way more advanced than even America. It's such an interesting place, though it's tiny, very small place, small population, so it's easier to operate as such. It's homogenous, it's high trust, so it's just it's such a contrast to the West that I find it fascinating. Yes. So Shintoism and Buddhism is king over there. I guess I'd say atheism is probably a little bit more common, or just this type of secularism. But Shintoism for sure, and Buddhism definitely are the more traditional spiritist or philosophical. And then there's also, of course, Confucianism as some influence. But yeah, those are definitely the traditional spiritist worldviews. But for the most part, it's just very secular. You know, it's very industrial. People there I don't think, well, it depends on the generation, right? Maybe the older generation probably adheres to some of those ideas a little more, or at least are influenced based on their upbringing as children. But you go to, like, you know, the younger gens, they're completely removed from all of that. Yeah, no homeless. You might see one here and there, but it's very rare. You know, very clean. But again, we have to remember it's a small location. It's homogeneous, high trust. It's very orderly, great systems, great design. It doesn't have all the problems that a very complex, diverse place like the West has, or at least America. Anyhow, I'm gonna get myself out of here, guys. I'll see you tomorrow. I gotta get my notes together for tomorrow's show, and I gotta get working on this other video that I'm trying to post. I want to post it. I'd like to post it Thursday, but I'll probably post it Friday. So I'll see you guys in the morning. Peace and blessings to you all. Thank you for being with me.
I don't have to tell you things are bad. Everybody knows things are bad. It's a depression. Everybody's out of work or scared of losing their job. The dollar buys a nickel's worth. Banks are going bust. Shopkeepers keep a gun under the counter. Punks are running wild in the street. There's nobody anywhere who seems to know what to do, and there's no end to it. We know the air is unfit to breathe. Our food is unfit to eat. We sit watching our TVs while some local newscaster tells us that today we had 15 homicides and 63 violent crimes, as if that's the way it's supposed to be. We know things are bad, worse than bad. They're crazy. It's like everything everywhere is going crazy, so we don't go out anymore. We sit in the house, and slowly the world we're living in is getting smaller, and all we say is, please, at least leave us alone in our living rooms. Let me have my toaster and my TV and my steel-belted radios, and I won't say anything. Just leave us alone. Well, I'm not going to leave you alone. I want you to get mad.